So, Liz, welcome to our Listen.Better podcast this morning, and really interested to be talking to you today about ADHD. So, what is it? Let's start with the basics and tell me about it in connection with understanding if you might have it yourself or if a colleague might have it, what to look out for.
ADHD is Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. I hate the word disorder. I prefer condition. It's just a brain difference in the way a person's attention is focused. There are three types. So there's the primarily hyperactive, which is what you might think about, probably the classic ADHD. You think about the little boy, sort of literally running up and down the walls. That's, they can't stop moving. They're restless. It's, any sort of having to sit still is just, no. Then there's primarily inattentive, which you actually see a lot more in girls. That doesn't mean the hyperactivity is not there, but it's predominantly a difficulty in focusing and concentrating, in sort of following one idea all the way through. The hyperactivity tends to be, if it's there at all, tends to be more of an internal thing, more of a sort of racing thoughts. And then there's also the mixed type of ADHD, which is both. So what you might notice in colleagues, and that, obviously as adults, we learn over time to manage some of these things, to compensate for them. But you might notice someone who finds it really difficult to sit still in a long meeting, has to get up and pace around, or who's always fidgeting. You might notice someone talking really fast. People notice that about me, or interrupting, forgetting things, really easily distracted. You're talking about one thing and then all of a sudden you're off on a different topic altogether. Those are the classic things. There are other things as well, but most ADHDers as adults, we've learned to mask so well that you might not always spot it unless you know what you're looking for.
Okay, so I'm really interested. We've seen a lot of press, and there seems to have been a flurry of particularly women in their 40s, 50s now getting a diagnosis. So can I just sanity check something? Are we born with ADHD? And as you said, we mask it or compensate for it. But now, has there been a breakthrough in research or testing for more people to actually realise they've been working with this condition for many decades?
Yeah, so there's a few parts to that answer. One, so yes, you are born with ADHD. It is associated with some actual brain differences. And what they're seeing now is that there's a large genetic component to it that outweighs any sort of environmental situational thing. Obviously, those still affect how it presents, but yeah, you are born with it. Girls are chronically underdiagnosed. I said earlier, the classic ADHD that you think about is the little boy who's, a bit naughty, running around, won't sit down. Girls, I could wax lyrical about this for hours, but, essentially girls are more likely to be conditioned to be good girls, to sit still, to be seen, not heard, to be helpers, to get good grades, to do all of these things. And so girls, the theory is that girls tend to learn to mask a lot earlier. And I think that was definitely my experience. It was important to me to follow all the rules and make my parents and my teachers happy. And so I learned strategies to do this. So, yes, so a lot of women go through life, not necessarily knowing why they're experiencing what they're experiencing, sometimes not even realizing that it's different from what other people experience. Now, it's interesting that you say this flurry of sort of diagnoses in 40s and 50s. And that is absolutely true. And what some research is saying, and I can't cite you the exact study, but it's out there, is that the hormonal upheavals that we get as women, and perimenopause is obviously a big one, does have an effect on the presentation of ADHD traits. So it can magnify them. Now that can also happen during pregnancy, during a postpartum period, during the menstrual cycle. You can get this variation in the ADHD traits and how they are experienced by someone with ADHD. But perimenopause seems to be a big one. And certainly that was my experience.
Okay, so it tends to be women who are perhaps seeing a different, perhaps their coping mechanism starts to break down, that they then go and seek medical support or counselling to
Yeah,
understand what on earth's going on. But
I
then,
hear that a lot.
yeah, okay. So if we bring this into a business context, that's what Listen Better is all about, looking at leadership and
Mhm.
business life. Why do senior leaders, would you say, see ADHD potentially as the enemy? Can you elaborate?
Absolutely. And you think of the name attention deficit, okay, deficit, hyperactivity disorder, a deficit disorder. What do those words say to you as a senior leader? They say, ooh, run away, run away, get away now. No one wants to be the person with a disorder. No one wants to um, be having to constantly sort of manage and compensate for things. No, we are. That's what we're doing, and oftentimes doing it extremely well. We've been through our school years, our university years. We've excelled. We've had these strategies down pat. But it's exhausting, and so it feels like it's this problem, this awful thing that we have to hide from everybody and we have to compensate for in order to succeed in this highly competitive business environment. Now the truth is there are a lot of strengths that come with ADHD traits, but we really never hear them talked about. We don't hear them talked about when we talk about ADHD in children. It's medicated, it's managed, it's we have to get them to fit into the curriculum, and the same happens then throughout our lives. So we don't get the chance to ever think about ADHD. If we think about it at all, if we even get there to get the diagnosis or to even have the thought, oh, I wonder if I have ADHD, we don't get the chance to think in terms of what does this give me that actually fits really well into a hyper competitive, energetic, ever changing business environment. And there's a lot there that does.
I really like that, and this is probably a crunch point for this interview, is to perhaps state that having ADHD is not mutually exclusive from becoming or being a great leader. So I would love you to give me the strengths as you see them. What
Yeah.
4 or 5 would you list?
Yeah, no, and can I just say first, it's absolutely not an impediment to being a great leader. You have people like Ingvar Kamprad, who is the founder of IKEA. You have Richard Branson, David Neilman, who's the founder of JetBlue in the United States. Charles Schwab, who is a sort of brokerage investor. Some people say Jamie Oliver. I don't know if that's true. Some people say Steve Jobs was probably ADHD. And again, neither of those two were ever open about a diagnosis if they had one. These are all big names. These are names we recognize. And the thing about all of them is that they don't say I'm successful in spite of my ADHD. They say I'm successful because of it. David Neilman has actually said, if you gave me a choice between having ADHD and doing it all over again and not having it, I'd take the ADHD. And the reason is that, and it's particularly true of entrepreneurs, but I think it's true in any sort of high energy, fast changing business environment. And so many of them are these days. We don't have that old stability that we used to have. So, and I talk about things like, and this is my experience too, creativity, the ability to look at a problem and think, oh, I could do that differently. I've driven people nuts in my jobs because I've gone, we might do it that way, but we could try it this way. So creativity, problem solving, risk taking. One of the characteristics of ADHD is impulsivity. But as adults, of course, as we mask, as we learn to manage it, we learn to channel that into risk taking. And if you're successful in business, you're probably doing that in a way that is helpful and not destructive. So you're kind of weeding out the people that aren't able to manage risk effectively. So senior leaders with ADHD are incredibly well placed to take the kind of risks that a business needs to succeed, to get that sort of disruption in the markets that creates the change that then creates the growth. We can change directions really easily. We don't always like to, especially if you're talking on a task basis. If we're concentrating on something and you make me have to switch my focus, that's not very easy. We're not great at that. We're fantastic at big picture thinking, and we're fantastic at saying, you know what? Yeah, we've been going this direction, but actually that's the direction that we need to be going, and taking everybody with us because of our high energy. And those are just a few things. And I'm so, you could tell I feel so passionately about this, because what we say to ourselves as ADHDers and what we may have heard from other people is all that you need to be more organized, and you just need to try harder. And, this, you didn't proofread this very well. And yes, of course, all of those things are important. But when you put the hours in, when you put all those years of strategizing and compensating in, and you've gotten to a senior leadership position, you're bringing a team along with you. They can help you with the detailed stuff. Businesses need those big picture thinkers, those energetic, there's a different way of doing this, let's find it people. And we have that in spades.
The more you talk, the more I think, gosh, I probably have ADHD. Creativity, risk taking, comfortable with changing direction, or seeing that there's a new direction and just going for it, seeing the bigger picture, high energy, which are all fantastic positive traits, as you say, for leadership and entrepreneurial business growth, very much on everyone's lips at the moment, growth. So if anybody listening to this has a sense, gosh, that resonates, I feel like I've got some of those qualities going on. What happens next? If you want to get a diagnosis, is it a question of a questionnaire? How do you find out whether you are with that disorder? So
the first thing I would say is you don't always need a diagnosis. It's, of course, the medical profession frowns on self-diagnosis, but unless you particularly think that you will benefit from medication, and a lot of ADHDers do, it's not necessary. If you recognize the traits in yourself, there are plenty of fantastic books out there. I really highly recommend one called ADHD 2.0, and I cannot remember the name of the author, forgive me. But lots and lots of information out there that can offer insight and strategies and new ways of thinking about how you strategize and how you compensate for the difficult traits, because the difficult traits are still there. Now, if you do want a diagnosis, you can go through the NHS. As with everything, the NHS is severely overstretched. I'm hearing from clients about and other people about, sometimes a year, 2-year waits. You can go privately, and I believe there are some relatively more affordable routes for that now. When I got diagnosed almost 10 years ago now, it was an expensive proposition. It was worth it for me because I do benefit from medication. What you will do then is when you go and you'll see a psychiatrist and ideally one who specializes in ADHD, they will give you a questionnaire. They will do a lengthy interview with you. And it's not about catching you out. It's not about, seeing if you're telling the truth. It's to get an impression of how you have experienced your life. And they'll also be watching for things like, can this person actually concentrate? When I was being diagnosed, I was fidgeting the entire time. And she noticed that in the report. Now, I didn't notice it. She did. They will also talk to parents or family members who knew you as a child, usually. That's because with ADHD, it is a lifetime thing. You are born with it. If this is just started, that's something that can be associated with perimenopause just on its own, for example, for women, or stress or other physical illnesses can tip over into that sometimes. So they'll be looking for the sort of the trends as well, and not just what's going on for you right now. It's a very easy process. And in fact, I personally found it a very helpful process to really fit all these things together and start to think about some of my experiences as a child that I look back and go, oh, that makes sense. So it's worth doing if, if it's important to you to have that label. And for some people, it does help. Or if you want to get medication. Medication can be hugely helpful to help you focus, especially at work. Some people like to take it for work and then not have it at the weekends. Or they take a kind that wears off, after around 8 hours, so that the evenings they can have their kind of full creative ADHD brain online. So that's it in a nutshell. And it's an easy process, if not a quick one, or necessarily a cheap one.
Okay, and if people weren't so keen to go down the medical route, are there any self-care things? I'm thinking yoga, meditation, tai chi, but am I barking up the wrong tree?
I think all of those things are important. I think mindfulness is still quite the buzzword, isn't it? And ADHDers, we always tend to laugh at that because like meditation for us meditation's never, I don't think it's easy for anybody. That's why you have a meditation practice. If it was easy, we'd all just do it, but it can be super difficult for the kind of racing ADHD brain. But I have found that when we think in terms of, it's not about emptying your mind. It's about focusing your attention. And yes, that's difficult for us with ADHD, but it's okay if we focus for a second and then drift off, and then focus for 2 seconds and then drift off. You're still practicing that focus of attention. So yeah, I highly recommend anything like meditation, yoga, tai chi. All of those things can be incredibly helpful, and they're very healthy physically for your body. Someone with ADHD, our nervous systems are set just a little bit higher, and so having ways of just sort of grounding and calming that down can be incredibly helpful. Things like exercise. I hate to say it because I'm not a big exerciser myself, and they say, it's everything. It's like, well, if you exercise more, it'll help. But it is really true. It helps calm the nervous system again, helps regulate all the hormones in the body so that you're starting from a more balanced point of view. The same is true for nutrition, just making sure you're, staying away from the really, really ultra processed foods that there's a lot of research out there that shows that affects our metabolism and our physiology in ways that we don't know how that affects ADHD traits. But we know it's a good thing to kind of keep a balanced nutrition there.
Okay.
And for me personally, it was reading about it. It was doing the research. I got to my own diagnosis because my son had been diagnosed at about 5 years old, and I was reading through everything I could learn about it. Came across an article about ADHD in women and was going tick, 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 So just learning about it and filtering your learning so that you're looking for the positives. I just came across an article this morning on Forbes, a few years old, several years old, but called, ADHD superpower for entrepreneurs. A superpower. Some people hate that terminology, and so I'm careful with that. But some people really do see their ADHD as their superpower. And if you were learning about it and consciously choosing to look at the positive side of it, that's hugely important, because you'll find loads about how it's awful and it'll get in the way, and you have to just try to manage these things. But it's who you are, and that's okay, and not just okay. It can be incredibly helpful for you as a professional, for the business and the customers that you are giving or contributing your time and your talents to. When you embrace it, everything just gets a little easier.
I love your approach, Liz, and I understand you're working with clients who are coming to the realization that they've got this disorder, or they might have had diagnosis, and so you work with leaders to help them nurture those strengths and manage their symptoms, if you call them that, in the workplace.
Yeah, exactly that. I am working with people who almost to a one, they've had the late diagnosis. I think I have one who was diagnosed a little bit earlier, but no one who was diagnosed as a child so far. And yeah, and they are, like me, they've either found themselves in a senior position where much higher accountability, much higher visibility. They've got a bunch of people that they're managing upwards and downwards, and suddenly all of their strategies don't seem to be working anymore. And a lot of that might be because, that sort of position tends to come in your 40s, late 30s, maybe 40s, and you're also experiencing perimenopause. And so it's all this perfect storm of stuff that's going on. Often we have aging parents or teenage children at home. And so they're suddenly experiencing this moment of, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Sometimes even I don't know if I want to do this anymore. They're so tired of having been masking and compensating all the time.
Masks and compensating. They get to a break point. They happily collide with you. What sort of timeline and input from you produces a change where they're able to cope and then they can take off again?
Yeah, I wish I could give you an answer for everybody, and it is really personal. And it just really depends on where you are in the journey too. Sorry, therapist-y language there, but it is a journey, and if a client is coming to me and newly diagnosed and really struggling with what that means, it could take a little bit longer because we want to do some work first on, okay, what are the associations you're bringing to this? What is it you think about when you think about ADHD? What do you think this changes about you? Someone who's, right, okay, now I have this, I know what my strategies are, I've got this promotion now, and here's what I need to do, that might go a lot faster. And that can be exactly the opposite too, So the way I work with clients is they can see me on a session by session basis, much as I'm a counselor as well. And so as much as I would do is when I see counseling clients, as often as you like, it's pay as you go, basically. But I also work on a 6 months and 12 months basis with people where there are monthly sessions, some smaller mini sessions in between, and they have access to me in between by email or text or what have you. And I can do bespoke kind of packages as well. If someone says they want 9 months, fine, And sometimes I do, I call them laser focused sessions, which I really hate, but I haven't found a new name for it. But, an hour and a half, 2 hours, there's something specific that I want to work on. My ADHD is getting in the way of me preparing well enough for presentations to the board, and I need to fix that. And so, we'll spend 2 hours just really honing in on that particular thing.
Okay. And in this age of leaders understanding that we need to have increased diversity in the workplace, diversity, inclusion, equity, and of course, under diversity, we've got the neurodiversity. What's your advice to HR directors or head of people, head of talent, if they're trying to attract someone in perhaps with neurodiversity and ADHD sits within that? Is there differences for the interview process and the onboarding and the explaining to the rest of the team, or is that a protected characteristic? I'm just interested in the nuance around hiring.
Yeah, so I would say the first thing for HR directors, for anybody, for any manager to know, is examine your prejudices. And this goes for any neurodivergent, any disability, really. What is it that you think you know about, in this case, ADHD and people with ADHD, and really be honest with yourself about what judgments you might be making. Seek out someone like me to take you through, okay, here's what a really positive experience for an ADHDer can look like, and here are the positive benefits for the business. So that's the first thing. If you're actively seeking neurodivergent employees, yeah, absolutely be aware of the interview process. So for example, someone with ADHD, lots of big documents and lots of text on the pages and lots of things going on can be incredibly distracting, and we're likely to be hugely motivated, so we're going to do it. But if you wanted to make it easy for us, and this is good advice anyway, keep it simple, stupid, keep it plain, straightforward, clean, we sometimes we will go off on tangents about things, and we might need to be reined in, if you've only got an hour for this interview, as you found with me, probably. But also be aware that the way the ADHD mind works is we make these connections that a lot of people can miss, and that is actually a strength. So start to pay attention, not to what isn't happening. Oh, this person needs to be reined in or whatever, but what is that telling you about them? Is that energy? Is that being able to connect a dozen ideas within 15 seconds? Is that something that's going to help in this role that you're interviewing for? So really it's about changing mindset.
It's so interesting. And I'm wondering whether we're getting closer to a time where candidates proactively suggest that they have ADHD and these are the strengths and this is what it's brought to their career state.
That would be the point at which I could retire. Yeah, I would love to see that. And I would love to see businesses saying, we actively welcome ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, all of these different kind of neurodivergences, because they all do bring different ways of thinking, not just by dint of the condition itself, but by the experience of the person who has had to cope and manage with this all their lives, with varying degrees of support, depending on when they were diagnosed and how intensely they experience the more negatively impactful elements of those conditions. And for businesses to recognize that those differences in thinking and coping actually can create a real competitive edge is, that's the dream.
Fantastic. I feel like I've learned so much in just 20 odd minutes. Thank you so much, Liz, for your time today. And you've mentioned a couple of resources. The ADHD 2 book, we'll check the author and put that in the comments below the video. And also, is there a website that people can go to get more information?
I highly recommend both ADHD UK, which is a fairly new charity in the UK. They have lots of useful information. They particularly have, I know they have lots of resources for employers who have ADHD employees. So it's definitely first step for managers, for HR, and for people with ADHD. The other excellent resource is, it's a US-based resource. It is more kind of international, although, a lot of it will sound, it's American English, and a lot of it sounds very geared towards the American workplace. But still very helpful, which is called Attitude. So in America, they still call it ADD, which was the original name for it. So it's Attitude instead of Attitude. And yeah, again, terrific information. They do a magazine, they do a newsletter that's every time it pops up in my inbox, I read something from it because it's always really, really hugely useful.
Fantastic. That's so helpful. Once again, thanks so much for your time, Liz, and look forward to seeing you in real life at some point soon.
I hope so. Thanks so much for having me, Annabelle.